glad you're here. Stay a while, pull up a chair. You've got stories, we've got them too. Welcome to the Revel Room. Welcome to the Revel Room. Welcome to the Revel Room. Revel, revel, room, room, room. Welcome, welcome, bloom, bloom, bloom. Welcome to the Revel Room. Woo! Okay, welcome back to the Revel Room. You've got stories, I've got them too. Today I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about one of mine. I do look forward to having some guests on here soon, but you get another episode of Just Chrissy. So, all right, let's go ahead and start. The first episode I did, I kind of just talked about a lot of different things that this podcast was going to be about, and it was just a mix. But within that, I did mention cards on the table. And what was interesting is that was actually what a couple of you responded to and reached out to me and texted me about. And so I figured I was going to kick this episode off with that concept and what I meant by it. Because understandably, some of your comments were, is it really that easy? You know, when we just lay our cards on the table and tell everyone everything that's going on with us, it's not that easy. And sometimes people judge us, or it's scary, or there's not room to be loved in that. Or, you know, you can't just meet someone and tell them everything about you the first moment you meet them. And all of that I completely relate to and understand. So I wanted to just explain what I meant by cards on the table and what has shifted in that for me and why that shifted. And it's actually one of the hardest things that I've learned to do. And it's not necessarily about oversharing or not being able to have anything that's personal to you or not taking the time to build trusting relationships first. It's about choosing vulnerability over armor. And that's been a big lesson for me over the last couple of years, especially since losing Brandon. So I'm going to start this out with just a little seed of a story that I am going to come back to. And that is 8-year-old Chrissy. And when I lost my stepdad to liver cancer, and I was about 8.5 years old, and he was my world at that time. And I had to go visit him in the hospital, or I got to go visit him in the hospital. And I still remember the day that my mom came to my school to pick me up. She brought me a McDonald's Happy Meal and told me that they were going to have to take him off life support. And I was getting to go to the hospital for one last visit to say goodbye to him. And I got there, and at this point, he was very confused anyways from everything. I mean, his liver was truly failing. There was nothing else they could do. So he wasn't able to have conversation. You know, he was even kind of shaking his limbs up and down. It wasn't him. And, you know, everyone's kind of standing around you like, okay, say goodbye, tell him you love him, you know, whatever your last words are to this person that isn't even really able to have a conversation with you and function. And understandably, I froze. I didn't really have words to say to him. I couldn't say any of the last things that I wanted to share. But I do remember holding his hand. And if you can picture, you know, this hospital bed and literally almost arms going up and down, like really not in any sort of stillness. And when I held his hand, he did pause and held my hand back. And that was the last moment I remembered with him. I think there was a part of me that he knew I was there, obviously, by holding my hand. But for some reason, the stories we create and how we process our memories, I remember beating myself up for, you know, as long as I can remember, that I didn't say what I wanted to say to him in that moment, that I didn't use my voice. So we're going to come back to that. All right. My story with Brandon. We met in 2005, and he had just gotten diagnosed with his disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis. I may have mentioned that in the last episode. But really, it was like this opportunity for me to know, hey, I have this liver disease. It's supposed to be really slow progressing. And, you know, but I want to let you know the truth of what you're getting into. And obviously, you know, I already knew he was a great guy, someone I was interested in, wanted to get to know him. I'm sure looking back, there were pieces that connected. My stepdad with liver, I know I even paused and was like, wow, that's kind of a weird coincidence. But I also knew how much I loved my stepdad and how great he was. And I'm someone who always thinks we never know where life is going to take us or what's going to happen. So, we move one foot in front of the other anyway. And also, like I said, it was told it could be really slow progressing, had no idea what could happen with it. He could be sitting with it for 20 years with nothing. All right, well, you know what? I've always been someone who just takes the risks anyways. Let's do it. It ended up being a very fast progressing disease. He was in and out of the hospital, right away in our relationship. So even the week of our wedding, he was in the hospital like until the day before we were getting married. So it just kind of became our normal. And when you are a part of a normal chronic illness, I think it's really easy to get trapped or stuck in this. Almost you have to go in a little bit of a robot mode. I remember in the beginning, every 8 weeks when he'd go to the hospital and it would be a procedure that he'd have to get literally every 8 weeks, there would be tears, there would be, oh my gosh, are you okay? Trying to get used to someone not feeling good and ambulance rides. And then even that is something you start to get used to. And I think without realizing it for both of us, being in a relationship for, all parts of it, having a chronic illness involved, you put up pieces of armor and you have to protect yourself. I didn't learn until much later in our relationship something called anticipatory grief. And that made so much sense for me because it's almost like you already know the outcome or what the outcome could be. And you know that at some point you're going to be facing loss. And so your nervous system already starts to do the things that it's going to do to protect you from that loss. So anticipatory grief. And I don't even think you have to be in a loss to relate to this, like even as a parent, right? I think I anticipatory grieved the time Caden was going to leave when he turned 18 from the time he was born. I'm sure parents can relate to that. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm loving you. Okay, wait, how are you already 4? How am I bringing you to kindergarten? And you can like fast forward to the time that they're going to graduate from high school and be leaving, right? And so we know this. I even remember another time when I was sitting on the couch, literally looking at all our pets that were alive at the time, Brandon being alive, all the kids still being under one roof, and knowing that wasn't always going to be the case, that we were going to lose the pets, that kids were going to move out, that Brandon may not be here. So I think there's lots of moments that we anticipatory grieve things without even realizing that that's a thing. So anyways, anticipatory grief and building up armor. And I think both of us, he was scared to talk about things. Also, he's just not someone who really believes in therapy or talking about things. And I kind of just got on this robot mode, right? I take care of the kids. I take care of the house. I do what I got to do. We have hospital visits back and forth. That becomes normal. And I think without even realizing it, you're living in survival mode. You're building emotional armor. You're protecting yourself. You're preparing for things before it even happens, because we can have so many conversations with ourselves, right? Like, sure, he could die, but I could also walk out the door and something could happen to me. Sure, my child could move out, but this could also happen. And we need to do that because in reality, we cannot predict life in any way, shape, or form. And we're not meant to control it. We're not meant to know what's going to happen. So we kind of have to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. But what I learned is that I couldn't protect myself from the hurt and the pain and the loss without also blocking myself from more joy and love and expansion and happiness, right? You can't just choose. And so there's all this armor up. And at the end of the day, that didn't protect me. So fast forward to when Brandon was in the hospital, and I think that last month that we lived in Iowa City, this was after his 3rd transplant, and it did not go good. And the kids and I lived in Iowa City from April 30th to May 26th. We went home for like 2 nights total during that time, but he passed away May 26th. And there's a lot of assumption with people, with me and that story. that we had this month together. So we must have had so many conversations. We probably got to say all the things we needed to say. The kids got to say all the things we needed to say. And the truth of it actually is that no, we did not. So the transplant did not go as they wanted to. And your liver is a really important organ. It's filtering everything. So you have all these drugs in your body and things aren't working right. So the liver can't filter it. So his brain was confused for all the parts that he was woken up for. And I kept waiting, the kids kept waiting for when we would be able to have these conversations. And I wrote letters and I emailed and I texted and I recorded things to try to document our story, that story of the month. And I also did that to say all the things that I never got to say. Because even before he went in for that transplant, I came back from my retreat from Miami, came back a day early because I had a weird feeling. He wasn't feeling good. He picks me up from the airport. Hey, we're on our way to the hospital for a transplant. Once again, that was just a robot thing for us. Okay, cool. Another transplant. That's a huge deal, a liver transplant, right? But even that was all right, this is our normal. And so we're driving, we have Nash in the car, and then his dad takes him to the hospital. I'm packing up the kids, getting us ready for the hospital. We go and meet there, we're playing some games, we're doing our thing, but him and I still weren't willing to sit down and have that conversation, say some of the things we wanted to say to each other, cry, get it all out, because I think by then we had built so much protection around our hearts. There was so much armor. It was too scary to deal with and to talk about and to bear. So we just didn't. So truthfully, I didn't even feel like I got to say the things we probably wanted to say even before he went into that operating room. And then I didn't get to say any of the things I wanted to say when he was out of the operating room. And so that's kind of, like I said, a little misconception with how that went down. The moment never came. And no matter what our last moments are like with someone, I think it's natural as humans to beat ourselves up. We lose people suddenly, we lose people over time, but we're never prepared for it. That's the truth of the matter. And it's really easy to beat ourselves up. Once again, why this doesn't even just apply to loss as far as death, right? We beat ourselves up with breakups, with relationships that didn't work out, with jobs that didn't happen, with our children on a regular basis, right? It's human nature to beat ourselves up, to question ourselves, to think of all the things we didn't say, didn't do. But I was really in that place for the first time of truly realizing there wasn't another chance to say what I wanted to say or what I wanted to do. So for a while, I think I spiraled even in this, beating myself up. I think another thing that we do when we lose someone or lose something, once again in any situation, is also we can pedestal that, right? So maybe I was awful, he's on a pedestal. I'm sure we've felt that during a breakup or a loss or anything, and people can relate to that. And so that's when therapy really came in handy for me. I needed to go and unwind all the stories and process grief and dive right in. And that's what I wanted to do. I already knew that this wasn't something I was going to be able to get around. I didn't want to suppress any of it because I knew the only way through was to go through. And that's how I was going to heal. And that's how I was going to be able to show up for my children. Because one of the things that happened where I said the story was going to come back into place was 8-year-old Chrissy kind of became 44-year-old Chrissy standing there looking at it from the other perspective. I watched my children then say bye to their dad, and it's boom, I was right back in the operating room or the hospital the last day he was there. And literally some of the situation was identical because Brandon was confused. It was liver. He, we couldn't have a conversation. Doctors were in and out. Nurses were in and out. I mean, sometimes it's kind of crazy to me how much of a similarity was there. And what I knew I was living through again, but where I also felt maybe there was a full circle moment for a reason. And part of that was when I was standing there in the hospital and seeing my own kids, I knew how I wanted to show up for them as a mom, as the parent who was left, how I wanted to help them process my grief, because we all do the best that we can. And I never, ever say anything that I'm saying with with like meaning anything against anyone. We all did the best we could. It was really hard for me as that child to be able to process grief because I think, my mom was working full time and in grad school and, had already recently had a miscarriage and then lost her husband. And so I was just kind of left to process that grief by myself or to maybe not even talk about it. I was in private school where they don't really talk about that either. At the time, I'm not insulting private schools. My private school was like, there's nothing to talk about here. So I was kind of like this troubled child in some ways, acting out in all these different ways that people couldn't understand. But it's because I was grieving and I didn't even know what grief was or how to work through that. So I got to see me as an adult and me as a child in one moment, if that makes sense. And I decided how I wanted to show up. And I knew that the only way to show up was to allow my kids the room to process it, to be there for them, and that I had to do that work myself. But what I also got to see, where I said we'd come back to that first part of my story, was what it was actually like for a child in those moments with nurses, doctors, everyone around to try to say what they would want to say. Like, okay, say something to your dad or say, and of course they're going to freeze. Of course they're going to be like, what do I even say? That's not even a slightly comfortable situation. And you're seeing things that no one wants to see. So it was also like it healed 8-year-old Chrissy in this really weird way. It gave me permission to realize, oh my gosh, you were 8 years old and think that you should have known what to say in a hospital to someone that you loved watching them pass away. Like, what? That's mind-blowing to me, some of the things that we blame ourselves for or get mad at ourselves for. So it was like it healed that part of me. And then I also want to help my kids process what they're processing. So therapy, right? I needed to process guilt. I also chose EMDR for myself. That's something that a lot of people with PTSD can do as well. It helps kind of rewire the brain and rewire the stories we tell ourselves and also piece through some parts of our story that maybe don't make sense. So for me, that was huge. And it was also what got me to the realization that we were both protecting ourselves, that neither one of us fully let the walls down. We were trying to avoid pain. We were trying to avoid loss. But really, we also were doing the best we could with what we could. And we weren't, reaching for some of those outside resources that we needed. And it's like I mentioned before, protecting my heart from pain also protected me from joy. You can't numb grief without numbing love. And what I realized in that moment was, okay, Brandon's gone, but I have this chance to do the things that I want to do, to say the things I want to say, to live life differently. And between therapy, and I'm not going to lie, I also went to every medium I could find when he first passed away. A huge theme kept coming up. And that was my inability to be vulnerable. And Brené Brown talks about vulnerability and says we associate vulnerability with emotions we want to avoid, such as fear, shame, and uncertainty. Yet we too often lose sight of the fact that vulnerability is also the birthplace of joy, belonging, creativity, authenticity, and love. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. Real connection requires risk. Real joy requires being vulnerable to real pain. And oof. That's big, right? We can feel that. But that's where I wanted to live my life differently. Hence where cards on the table comes into play. Is I don't want to have more moments of thinking about the things I could have said, the conversations that could have happened, any regrets that maybe could be avoided, and I try not to live my life in regret. I don't love to live in shame and guilt. I think it makes us sick and isn't good for us, but we're human and we can't help that. I wanted from that moment on, which is weird, right? Because in my deepest heartbreak, it was also what cracked me wide open and also made my heart even more craving of love, of giving, of showing up, because it's like, okay, I get this opportunity. And I do feel like grief has this way of cracking you wide open because, like I said, you realize at the end of the day, we don't protect ourselves from any of it. As much armor as we put up, nothing felt like, well, that was really good. That barely hurt, right? Or, I just moved right on from that because I protected myself. I kind of realized it was all BS, protecting ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves. So I was getting to choose to step forward in a different way. I feel like I've always been someone who's known as wearing my heart on my sleeve and sharing my emotions and being an open book. But there's a difference between that and cards on the table in my mind. And that's where that idea of vulnerability and real connection comes in. So that's what I meant by that. And people who are in my life are going to have these pieces of me now of cards on the table, and I want that from them too. So we got full circle, and that's kind of the story of where this came from. I always talk about how there's pre-Brandon Chrissy and post-Brandon Chrissy. And what I mean by that is anyone who's gone through really any kind of, once again, grief, which is all different kinds of losses, job changes, ending of relationships, loss, things with children, our dreams that didn't happen. Anyone who's gone through any of that can even relate to how we grow in that or how that shifts or changes us. I think when we have really big moments of grief and loss and heartache, it changes us in ways that we never imagined. I'm slowly accepting that I will never be the same person. In some ways, I'm accepting that. And in other ways, I'm grateful for that, because I don't want to be the same person. I completely believe that even in the worst things that happen to us, there's chances for growth and stories and, leveling up or expanding. It kind of depends on how we look at it, right? But I think that also is my gift to Brandon. If I can choose to live the best way that I can and learn these lessons and share them, then that in another way feels like I'm honoring him. So it's like, yeah, there's pre-Brandon Chrissy, post-Brandon Chrissy, and that's just the way it is. And I know I talk to other people who ask, like, do you lose relationships after loss? The answer is yes. Does life change after loss? The answer is yes. Because you're not the same, so life can't stay the same. And there are people who I 100% understand aren't going to love post-Brandon Chrissy. They're not going to have capacity for cards on the table, for honest conversations, for some of the things that come up for me. And I have to slowly accept that and be okay with it. And I think that's kind of been part of my journey for a long time, because another thing a lot of you can probably relate to is I've been a chronic people pleaser. And I always say I'm like a recovering people pleaser. We hear that term all the time. In yoga, we talk a lot about the chakras. Those are energy centers in our body that we relate to. And the throat chakra is one of the ones where it comes to speaking our truth, using our voice. And that's one that's always blocked for me. I also always have like different things going on in my throat. And when you believe in energy work like I do, it all comes down to what we're saying or what we're not saying. So that's another part of just what I want to heal. I know that sometimes this voice is blocked. I know that people-pleasing stuff goes back to childhood, wanting everyone to like me and doing all the things, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of rejection. So all of that to me is slowly being healed by this idea of cards on the table. In yoga, we talk about the yamas and the niyamas. They are ways to live. The yamas are how we show up outwardly for the world. The niyamas are how we show up for ourselves. And one of the ones that really helped me in this whole idea too is satya is the idea of truth. That one of the biggest things we need to do is speak our truth. And then ahimsa is non-harm, which leads to truth with kindness. So a big thing that I learned with cards on the table or being vulnerable is truth, when spoken with kindness, is safe, and it's not always on us to carry how that lands with people or how someone receives our honesty when we're doing it in a really authentic, kind, compassionate, empathetic way. And that gave me a little bit more permission too, to like feel safer to say my truth and to be able to tell my story. And I already know that there's parts of my story that people are going to agree with, parts that they're not. And at the end of the day, I will remind everyone, and what I mean by everyone is remind myself that it's no one else's story. It is mine. And we can't please everyone, and no one else is walking in my shoes. So what I can do is try to live the best version of it for myself, true to me. And I know that true to me comes from sharing and also having others share, because I've brought that up in the first podcast too. One thing that I fully believe is that at the end of the day, a lot of us crave connection. We crave having someone see us, having someone hear us, and we get scared of that connection. We get scared of sharing. We get scared of being vulnerable. All right, so cards on the table. Is there room for us to look at how we are showing up for ourselves and others? Is there room for us to ask throughout the day sometimes if we're even being honest with ourselves? One of my really good friends reminded me when sometimes I start feeling like I'm too much, which I'm sure some of you can also relate to. If we start sharing, if we start saying our feelings, if we have any sort of emotions or any kind of emotional breakdown or meltdown or anything, it's always this idea that we're too much. Can people handle, what's inside of us? And the true answer is the right people will, and the other ones won't. And that's really hard to let the ones go that won't. But, I always talk about the fact that I truly believe that people are in our lives for a reason, season, lifetime. And I also have to practice that when I realize that there's people who are only in my life for a reason or a season, and let that go. So one of my friends always reminds me that me being willing to share what's on my heart, to share what's on my mind, to lay my cards on the table, to even tell you, this is how I need for you to show up for me. This is how I need to feel safe. This is how I need to feel loved. This is my story. Do you want to listen? I also want to hear that from you. But she reminds me, you think that's too much sometimes, but what a gift. What a gift to be able to give that to people so honestly, so that that's not a guessing game. Half the time, even in our relationships, when we're struggling, we're trying to guess and figure out the other person. What do they need? What do they want? How am I not showing up? And then we blame ourselves, then we blame the other person, then we get resentful. But I still remember sitting there and watching Addams Family. They did it at the Grand here in town where I live. And Gomez and Morticia, they have this relationship, right, where nothing is off the table, and they have to be honest with each other on everything. I don't know if you know the story, but it's literally like they cannot lie about anything. And I was watching it like, wow, what a crazy concept. But then at the same time, because this was after Brandon, also watching it with the idea of, wow, can that be done with someone? Can we actually create relationships where we feel safe to be so honest? And so I'm trying it, even when I have thoughts that I think are crazy, thoughts that I think don't make sense, thoughts that I think are too much. Like, what's going to happen if I'm maybe saying it? I don't know. Maybe in 2 more years I'll come back and be like, no, cards on the table is awful. No, I'm just kidding. But that idea of just being able to be more honest and share all the parts of us. I know as a society we have this whole thing on misery loves company. I started thinking about that today too for this episode. Is it that misery necessarily loves company? Or is it that when we're sad, we want to know that others can relate or see us or have maybe been there too? When we're angry, when something doesn't make sense, do we maybe want to know that other people can share in that? I don't know. I mean, I understand that there can be a time that we're getting jaded or stuck in our misery, and that's when we have to do the work, right? It's always up to us to do the work. But maybe it's not just this one saying that we should lead it to, that misery loves company. Maybe it's that we want to have more real, honest conversations and feel safe to do so. And it's a practice. And I'm practicing it with my writing on my Instagram page. It's a practice that I'm doing by having a podcast and thinking that any of you want to hear my stories. But I also truly believe that that's how we heal. We heal ourselves by healing others, and we connect with each other by sharing stories. I truly believe that. So yeah, I've lost relationships since living this way, and I've gained incredible ones since living this way. I'm going to continue to have imposter syndrome and fear of being too much. And I'm going to continue to have moments that I spiral or things come up because I'm human. And another thing that I think people don't realize that I'm learning too is that even through healing from my grief, I am always going to have layers that I never had before with everything that comes up, because there is loss there now. There is abandonment there now. There is the reality that life is fleeting and how scary that can be. And with cracking myself open for more joy, more love, more pleasure, I already know what I'm setting myself up for. So I have layers now to like what I feel that I'm learning to accept, but I also never want to lose them or turn them off again. So yeah, I'm cracked open. I'm scared every day. And the other way didn't help me. So here I go. So in this vulnerability comes living authentically. Honest conversations make me feel safe. I'm teaching myself that reassurance isn't weakness, Clarity builds connection. I always say this thing that I don't like things clear as mud. I like clear as water. And gaslighting is something that's really, really easy to do that sometimes even comes without us realizing it from the fear of being vulnerable. Grief changes you. It's not something that we're ever going to finish. And I will keep reiterating throughout this podcast that it's something that all of us are going to experience and go through. And this is why I want to keep sharing the story on it, because it doesn't have to be putting someone in the ground to feel grief, and how we can all have this human experience. Kute Blackson wrote a book called You Are the One. And in it, he said that the graveyard is the richest place in the world. What he means is that we're buried with dreams inside us, words inside us, things we didn't say, songs we didn't sing. So it's full of all these things that we didn't do while we had the chance and while we were here. I want to fully be here in this experience of being human. I know that we're meant to share it, and I want to keep speaking so that it's not inside of me. I want to keep doing so that it's not inside of me, and living with this chance that I'm getting to live. And it's going to be hard, and I'm not trying to sunshine and rainbow it, but I'm inviting you just into some of these ideas with me, and things that maybe I even would have loved to have started practicing sooner. Maybe I would have, maybe I wouldn't have, it's never shoulda, woulda, coulda, because we never know how we're gonna show up until we're in that moment. But I am just gonna kind of finish with this last idea with why this even matters for relationships and the people in our lives. I like to think of a coffee cup, how, you go to have your coffee cup and you get a little chip. You still want to drink from it, right? It's your favorite coffee cup. Gets another chip, you're still drinking from it. Sometimes we even get that little crack where we're like, oh, a little bit of our coffee is seeping out, but it's all good, right? And then we know eventually it leaks too much and we have to put this coffee cup down. I kind of feel like that sometimes, even in relationships with our friends, with romantic relationships, with our kids, that it's important for us to think about the things we're saying and how we're saying them, or making sure that we even say them. Another thing I practice with my kids, for example, I won't let them go to school with us arguing and have them go be in school for 8 hours with that on their hearts and their minds. I want to make sure before they're leaving for the day that I'm telling them I love them, even if it's like a stressful morning. I'm not going to sit here and preach that you should never go to bed angry, because I don't necessarily believe that. Sometimes we need a pause and to calm down and think about things, but to just know that our ego, our stubbornness can lead to less conversation, to less sharing. Whereas if we have these moments of being able to talk to each other, to say what we need, to be able to be vulnerable, I just think it truly helps everyone in the end, and it creates less chips in that coffee cup, lasts longer, or hopefully throughout time. And it's never too late. I believe it's the Japanese philosophy, kintsugi. I might be messing that up. Anyone can correct me. The broken pottery, right? So they take this broken pottery and they glue it back together and they repair it. And everywhere that it was cracked and put back together, they put the gold paint on it. So it becomes this new pottery, even more beautiful than before in some ways, with its cracks and gold painting. But where I relate that to relationships or being vulnerable or conversation is that it's never too late to start. And sometimes we start to repair slowly, even with ourselves and with others. And then you can see this beautiful new piece of work, or the gold artwork, I shall say. So I challenge you, as you are finishing up this podcast with me, or as you move on to your day, where are you still wearing armor? What truth have you been afraid to speak? Who needs to hear your heart or can hear your heart? What cards are you still holding? Tomorrow isn't promised, and I don't say that to scare us or make us, have to go think about that all day with anxiety, but with the idea that it's the truth. I don't even know what's going to happen when I walk out this door after I'm done talking to you. So we do get this one life to live honestly, to let ourselves be seen, to share our stories, to choose courage in vulnerability and realize it's not weakness, and to also be willing to trust that the right people are going to stay in our lives and accept us and love us who are there, and that it's okay to let some of the other ones go. Reason, season, lifetime. Yes, vulnerability can lead to heartbreak, but it's the only thing that allows us to love fully and to be completely in our joy. Everything Brandon and I tried to do to protect ourselves from happened anyway. There was still loss. There was still pain. The only thing the armor actually did was keep us from fully experiencing the love while we had it. So maybe as we step into a little bit more cards on the table, you can let yourself into a little bit more of that love while it's still here. That's our Revel Room episode for you today, friends. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to the Revel Room.